Nora Whitmore had only been teaching at Lenox Community College for 3 semesters, but students remembered her voice, soft, certain, always finishing her thoughts even when others interrupted. She taught English composition in room 204, a small classroom with mismatched chairs and a rusted AC unit that groaned louder than the lectures. It was Wednesday, April 5, 2006, the week before midterms. Attendance was light, the campus quiet. At 10:15 a.m., Nora finished her first class of the day, assigned reflective essays, erased the board like she always did, and walked out into the hallway. It would be the last confirmed sighting of her. She was wearing her usual cardigan, gray with thinning sleeves, and carrying a thermos she refilled each morning with chamomile tea from the lounge. Her keys were later found on the corner of her desk. Her bag was left beneath it. Nothing was missing except Nora. Security footage from the main entrance caught her entering the building just before 9 a.m., stopping to talk briefly with a janitor. But the cameras facing the lounge hallway flickered between 10:20 and 10:45 due to a reported circuit fault. No footage existed showing her leaving. Her classroom remained untouched for hours. Her lunch, yogurt and a half sandwich in a brown paper bag, sat undisturbed in the faculty fridge. No one noticed she was missing until it was too late to retrace anything. Her next class was scheduled for 1:30 p.m. A student knocked on the locked classroom door at 1:32. At 1:37, a faculty assistant checked the main office. At 2:10, campus security was contacted. A sweep of the parking lot showed Nora's car still in her usual spot, third from the end in staff lot B. The doors were locked, her purse was on the passenger seat, and her parking permit hung from the mirror. Nothing about it seemed rushed. Her office, if you could call it that, was a shared cubicle space in the English department basement, and nothing had been moved. Her mailbox still held returned papers and 2 unopened letters. When police arrived later that evening, they found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play, and no obvious leads. Nora lived alone. No pets, no roommates, no romantic partners listed. Her rent was current, her utilities paid. Her phone records showed no unusual calls, no trace of planning or distress. She hadn't requested time off. Her last known text was a reply to a student asking for an extension. Just turn it in by Friday. No worries. She was, by all accounts, an incredibly ordinary person. Quiet, punctual, generous with her time. The type who offered rides to students when buses ran late, who corrected grammar in sticky notes on the break room fridge, who watered the department ficus when everyone else forgot. She wasn't the kind of person people feared losing, because she wasn't the kind of person anyone expected to vanish. That night, the faculty lounge buzzed with disbelief. Some whispered she had a breakdown. Others said maybe she'd gone off the grid. But the campus wasn't large. 2 main buildings, 1 gym, an aging auditorium wing. There weren't many places to disappear. Search teams combed through bushes, stairwells, crawl spaces. Police dogs traced her scent from the classroom to the hallway, and then lost it. Investigators floated theories: abduction, misadventure, suicide. But the lack of any trace made each of them feel equally hollow. Her mother, Lorraine, arrived from Kansas the next day. She described her daughter as the most dependable soul you'd ever meet. Nora's childhood had been stable, no history of running away, no trauma in the closet, no enemies that anyone knew of. The media picked up the story within 48 hours. Teacher vanishes from campus made for an unsettling headline. But with no updates, interest faded. The first week passed without discovery. Then, the first month. Billboards with Nora's photo went up on highway exits, but leads were either false, vague, or unverifiable. One student claimed she'd seen Nora's silhouette near the gym the afternoon she vanished. Another said they heard a woman crying behind the theater wing, but couldn't recall when. None of it held. The college held a candlelight vigil by the main steps. A framed photo of Nora was placed in the entrance hall beside a stack of pamphlets titled, "Have You Seen This Woman?" But beneath the formalities, a creeping unease settled across the faculty. They worked beside someone who disappeared without a trace, in a building they still entered every day. Staff started locking their offices. Some avoided the lounge entirely. Rumors began. Students whispered about a hidden hallway, a locked door near the auditorium, a janitor who transferred mid-semester. None of it made sense, but it echoed something real. Nora was gone, and nobody knew how or why. And as the semester ended, one question began to solidify across every department, every quiet walk to a car at dusk, every half glance down a dim corridor. What could have happened to her in broad daylight, on a campus this small? Detectives from the county sheriff's department arrived before sunrise. They asked for full access to every hallway, stairwell, and closet in the administrative and humanities buildings. Officers canvassed the perimeter, while a K-9 unit was brought in just after 7 a.m. The dogs caught Nora's scent from the faculty lounge, followed it briefly past the vending machines near the west wing, then lost it entirely near the fire doors leading to the faculty parking lot. That's where the scent vanished. Abruptly. No scent on the stairwell railings, none near the nearby dumpsters, none toward the old campus greenhouses. It was like she disappeared into open air. Detectives began compiling a profile. No medical records hinted at mental instability. No unexplained purchases, no burner phones, no rental cars. Her bank account remained untouched. No withdrawal, no attempted transfer. Nothing to indicate a plan or panic. They began interviewing faculty, starting with her department. Nora had no complaints on file. She had missed one department meeting the prior month due to a migraine, but sent an email about it ahead of time. Her supervisor described her as responsible and reserved, the type who apologizes for taking up space in the doorway. Students described her as kind but firm. One said she once stayed after class to help edit his resume, unprompted. Another remembered she offered to buy a student lunch when his financial aid hadn't cleared. No one could remember her ever raising her voice. When investigators asked whether she had a boyfriend or partner, most shrugged. A few thought she might have dated a substitute instructor the previous fall, but no one had seen them together since. His alibi checked out. He'd moved back to Oregon. Phone records confirmed he hadn't spoken to Nora in 6 months. Attention turned to any signs of harassment or stalking. Nora hadn't filed any formal reports, but one faculty member vaguely remembered her saying she didn't like staying late alone anymore. No specifics. Her email history showed nothing unusual. No threats, no anonymous messages. One student had emailed her 3 times after receiving a failing grade, but the tone was more desperate than aggressive. Still, investigators followed up. He was ruled out. Her cell phone, a flip model with limited GPS capability, last pinged at 10:17 a.m. to a nearby tower, the exact same time she was last seen walking toward the faculty lounge. After that, silence. The phone didn't move. It didn't ring. It didn't even attempt to reconnect. Its signal never returned. 3 days into the search, a janitor came forward. He said he saw Nora around 10:30 a.m. near the old auditorium wing. That part of campus hadn't been used since budget cuts closed the theater department in 2004. The door was supposed to be locked due to water damage and pest issues. He claimed she looked distracted, maybe even lost. He didn't think much of it at the time. Investigators took his statement seriously. They searched the wing thoroughly, behind curtains, inside prop closets, under the warped stage. They brought in ground-penetrating radar. They even checked the underground utility tunnels, but nothing surfaced. No fibers, no signs of a struggle, no dropped items, not even a shoe print. The janitor's story couldn't be corroborated by cameras. None pointed that way, and the West Hall security feed had cut out from 10:20 to 10:45 due to that same power flicker. A coincidence or something more? No one could say. Her family arrived in waves. First her mother, then her younger sister, then an uncle who had once been in law enforcement. All said the same thing. Nora wasn't the kind of person who disappeared. She was careful, even cautious to a fault. She called her mother every Sunday, kept a physical calendar in her apartment with color-coded ink, and set alarms on her watch to never miss appointments. Her apartment was clean, not staged, but lived in. Her laundry basket had clothes from that Monday. Her dishes were rinsed and set on a drying rack. A book was open on her couch, page corner folded. She was in the middle of her life, not exiting it. Still, theories grew. Some speculated she'd suffered a psychotic break, walked away and forgot who she was. Others believed she had a secret relationship that turned violent. More conspiratorial voices suggested faculty cover-ups, blackmail, or student involvement. But the police had nothing to support any of it. No DNA, no prints, no sightings. The case lacked everything it needed, except motive. There was no motive. Nora didn't have enemies. She didn't gamble. She didn't drink. She didn't hide secrets online. Her journals, found in her bedroom, read like the interior life of a quiet person trying to teach and maybe one day write. There was no darkness there, no desperation, no clues. Campus culture shifted in the weeks that followed. Professors stopped working after sunset. Keys were reissued. The faculty lot began seeing patrols every hour, but the whispers didn't stop. Everyone remembered that hall, that wing, that moment where the camera glitched. Some were sure she'd been taken. Others believed she chose to disappear. But no one could say why. And as the second month passed and the flyers began curling at the corners, the question sharpened into something heavier. If she didn't leave on her own, then who watched her walk into that hallway and made sure she never came back out? In the original sweep of the campus, investigators logged every room, closet, and access door by number. They worked off a facilities map last updated in 1998, cross-checking entries with the college's maintenance coordinator. One area raised mild confusion, a small storage unit marked behind the old faculty auditorium. It was listed as a 213-S, tucked behind movable walls used for backstage props. When they reached the location, officers found the door partially obscured by two wheeled costume racks and a set of plywood flats leaning diagonally against the wall. The handle wouldn't turn. The frame looked warped. The assumption, one that no one challenged, was that the door had been sealed from the outside during renovations. The officer marked it as inaccessible, likely unused, and moved on. At the time, there was urgency to cast a wide net, not to fix sticky hinges. In statements later reviewed, the facilities coordinator told detectives the room had been sealed off after a minor flood in 2003 and wasn't part of current maintenance rotations. He couldn't recall who last accessed it. When pressed, he admitted no one ever officially removed it from circulation. No key had been found. No maintenance request had been filed. It was just one of those dead corners in a campus that had outgrown its own blueprint. And for now, it was just one less lead to chase. The investigation stalled. As spring turned into summer, focus shifted away from the building itself. New theories emerged. There were alleged sightings of Nora in towns upstate. One woman called from a bus terminal in Enfield, saying she'd spoken to someone matching Nora's description. Quiet, tired-looking, carrying only a small duffel. The station's cameras didn't back it up. A gas station attendant in Pine Hollow claimed a woman who looked just like that missing teacher bought coffee at 3 a.m. and paid in coins. That footage turned out to be unusable. Grainy, overexposed. A few tips came from out of state, even as far as Kentucky. None of them could be confirmed. Each left her family hanging just long enough to hurt again. Lorraine Whitmore, Nora's mother, remained in town. She stayed in a rented apartment near campus, hoping proximity might help. She went to the college grounds every Sunday morning, placing a fresh flyer near the student center even after administrators asked her to stop. She sat through faculty meetings open to the public, often without speaking. She kept Nora's phone line active for over a year. She read every theory posted on early message boards, some cruel, some desperate, most absurd, but none worse than the silence. Nora's apartment lease expired after 6 months. Lorraine moved Nora's things into a small storage unit outside town. She couldn't bring herself to donate them. She left the bedroom in their Kansas home untouched. The bookshelf stayed frozen in time, dust jackets still curled, notebooks stacked in the corner, a dried bouquet Nora had brought home one Thanksgiving, still standing in a glass tumbler on the desk. The door stayed shut. Visitors were asked not to go inside. Back at Lenox Community College, life didn't stop. A new instructor was hired to cover Nora's courses. The first week of class, she placed a framed photo of Nora on her desk, but it was gone by mid-semester. Students shifted focus. The administration rewrote security protocols. A new ID badge policy was introduced. Cameras were updated across all entrances. But in quiet moments, that wing of the building, especially the old auditorium corridor, held a kind of tension. People moved a little faster there. Doors were pulled closed a little harder. Custodians reported odd drafts, flickering motion sensors, small things, nothing that could be filed or investigated. No one thought to revisit that jammed door. It was considered irrelevant, checked, logged, sealed, even though no key had ever been found, even though no one could confirm the last time it had been opened. It became part of the architecture of the unknown, another blind spot tucked behind a college built half a century ago and patched up too many times without proper records. It wasn't that anyone forgot. It was that no one wanted to look like they didn't know. That hallway had its own logic. It had been marked, crossed off. It didn't fit the theory that Nora had left campus, but it also didn't fit the theory that she hadn't. By winter, new students didn't know her name. Her flyers, once bright and taped across every door, faded in the sun and rain, curling at the corners until they fell or were swept away. Professors who'd worked beside her stopped mentioning her in meetings. The search had grown cold, not through failure, but through fatigue. And the room behind the auditorium, behind the racks, the forgotten flats, the stacked boxes no one wanted to move, remained sealed in quiet denial, collecting dust behind a wall everyone had already walked past. By the end of the second year, Nora Whitmore's name had all but disappeared from the daily rhythm of the college. Her face still lingered in the recesses of older staff memory, in the way the English department paused when unlocking the door to room 204, or the silence that sometimes hung over faculty meetings. But outwardly, the campus had moved on. New students arrived unaware. Old flyers were finally taken down. The benches where search teams once rested now hosted undergraduates eating lunch. The building aged like it always had, and the hallway near the old auditorium wing stayed just as dim, just as unremarkable. When her name was mentioned, it came in softened tones, like an echo trying not to disturb the present. 5 years in, the file sat thick and unresolved. The original lead detective had since retired. A second took over, then a third. Each inherited the case, skimmed the notes, made a few calls, and concluded the same thing. No active leads, no credible suspects, no forensics to test. There was nothing new to pursue. Theories had long been calcified. Abduction, voluntary disappearance. A breakdown followed by tragic misadventure. The storage room behind the auditorium remained listed as cleared, no entry, its relevance slowly buried beneath bureaucratic routine. Even her personnel file was eventually archived and stored off campus, boxed and labeled like all the others. For those not personally affected, Nora Whitmore simply became one of those stories, odd, tragic, unsolved. Her mother never accepted the silence. Every April 5th, she returned to the black iron gate near the campus entrance and held a candle. Sometimes a few students joined. Sometimes a local news crew filmed the moment. Most years she stood alone, holding Nora's photo against the wind. She never changed the frame. It was the same photo used on the missing posters, the one taken outside Nora's apartment in spring, a blurry sidewalk behind her, one shoulder slightly turned, her mouth caught mid-smile. Lorraine never left town. She took a part-time job at the library, lived in a small apartment with Nora's things boxed along the hallway walls. She kept a record of every phone call, every email, every article that mentioned her daughter's name. She sent updates to the detective assigned to the case even when they stopped replying. In year 10, something shifted. Not in the case, but in how people talked about it. A local journalist published a retrospective titled 10 Years Missing. The Teacher Who Vanished in Plain Sight. It featured archived interviews with staff, short quotes from former students, and a brief note from Lorraine Whitmore. They say the trail went cold, but to me, Nora is still warm, still real. still close. The article was shared widely in the county. Some former students commented, others reposted. Then came the email, sent to the journalist from a name she didn't recognize. A man in his late 20s, now living in Chicago. His name was Jonah Miles. Jonah had taken Nora's freshman comp class in 2006. He had been quiet, struggling academically. Nora had spent time after class with him, helping him write a personal essay about losing his older brother. He remembered her voice, her patience, the way she once told him, "Some things take time to come out right." He never forgot that. 10 years later, Jonah had become a digital audio producer. He offered to start a podcast, one focused entirely on Nora's disappearance. The journalist agreed to help. Lorraine gave her blessing. The first season of Cold Lecture Hall premiered 6 months later. The episodes were methodical. Each covered a different aspect of the case: the timeline, the initial search, the surveillance failure, the janitor's account, the storage room, the dead-end tips. They interviewed retired detectives, reviewed redacted police records, revisited maps of the building and flawed floor plans. They even walked through the old auditorium wing, recording ambient audio. The podcast gained traction quickly. True crime forums picked it up. Listeners submitted theories. A few callers claimed to have seen Nora in different cities: Austin, Santa Fe, even upstate New York. One anonymous tip said to recheck the West Wing wall that doesn't hum like the others. Investigators looked into it. Nothing turned up. But the podcast did something the investigation hadn't done in years. It brought people back into the story. It reminded them Nora wasn't just a file or a ghost or a theory. She had taught, she had written, she had existed in real time, in real space, and someone knew what happened to her. Jonah closed the final episode of the first season with a quote from the retired lead detective. "There was something about that building I never liked. Something unfinished." He didn't elaborate. When pressed later, he simply said the layout always felt wrong, and that maybe they all missed something because they trusted what was supposed to be there instead of questioning what wasn't. The episode ended in silence, just ambient noise from that hallway near the auditorium. A low hum, then a minute of nothing, then a faint metallic click captured accidentally while Jonah had set down his recorder. No one noticed it then, but listeners would notice later, and one of them would recognize it, and that single sound, left in by accident, would become the spark that finally turned everyone's attention back to that room, the one that never had a key. In the 6th episode of Cold Lecture Hall, Jonah Miles revisited faculty-only areas rarely shown to students. One story stood out: a vague complaint logged in 2007 by a student intern assigned to clean faculty areas during summer break. The note was brief, almost dismissive. It mentioned an odd indentation behind a row of cabinets in the teacher's lounge. The intern claimed it felt like a hollow wall, possibly storage, but no one followed up. The complaint never became an official facilities request. At the time, the lounge had undergone minor remodeling. Shelves were moved, new lockers installed. Whatever the student thought they saw was assumed to be a mistake, but Jonah included it anyway. It was the kind of footnote that didn't matter, until it suddenly did. 2 weeks after the episode aired, Jonah received an encrypted message from someone claiming to be a former maintenance worker. The man didn't leave a name, just a single sentence typed in the subject line: "That wing always smelled wrong." Like old bleach and wet cloth, even in summer, the body of the email contained nothing else, no context, no directions, just a file attachment that was immediately flagged by Jonah's antivirus software. He waited, scanned, opened it anyway. It was a scan of an old maintenance ledger, faded handwriting, smudged corners, a partial entry labeled a 213, check wall bracing behind break room lockers. The note was dated May 1998, the last time that room had been inspected for internal structure. Jonah checked the public college floor plans. Room A213 didn't appear anywhere. He brought the information to the journalist who had helped him launch the show. Together, they reviewed archived building plans. Most were updated in 2003. Some were earlier, from a 1980s campus expansion after state funding was briefly increased. Those blueprints were hard to find, most scanned poorly. But one day, buried in a retired groundskeeper's personal files, came a clear overhead layout of the West Wing. It showed 24 labeled rooms, each corresponding to known entries. But just behind the teacher's lounge, behind a row of utility closets and drywall partitions, was a small, unnumbered square. A room roughly 8 by 10 feet. No door listed, no purpose identified, just empty space boxed into the architecture like an oversight. Except the room was never listed as removed. It wasn't demolished. It wasn't accounted for at all. It simply vanished from updated blueprints after 1990. Jonah brought the information to campus officials. They declined to comment. When pressed, the school stated that all storage and faculty areas had been previously searched in full cooperation with law enforcement and that no rooms had been concealed. When asked directly about room A213, the press liaison paused, requested clarification, then said, "That room doesn't exist." But Jonah had photos of the blueprint, multiple versions, different years, different formats. The room had been there, then erased. The implications were hard to ignore. The podcast audience doubled within a week. Speculation exploded. Reddit threads analyzed the blueprints. Some users claimed the false wall theory explained why Nora's scent had vanished so abruptly. If she had entered a space sealed from the rest of the building, dogs would have lost her trail immediately. A former student who'd worked backstage in the auditorium wrote in, remembering how the faculty lounge often smelled chemical when no cleaning crew had been there. Another claimed a professor once told her never to open the West utility closet without a supervisor. It was too unstable, he'd said. That professor had since retired. Efforts to reach him failed. No known address, no forwarding number. His name didn't appear in faculty records after 2009. Jonah released an emergency bonus episode. In it, he laid out everything. Every complaint, every inconsistency, every instance of someone insisting a room had once existed, then being told it hadn't. The episode ended with a single question. If the school is right and there's nothing behind that wall, then why are they so sure what's not there? A day later, an anonymous email arrived with a photograph taken from inside the old auditorium wing. It showed the back of the teacher's lounge from a maintenance corridor, one that had long been blocked off by set storage and old stage equipment. The photo was grainy, but the shadow lines on the wall clearly revealed an outline, a frame inside a frame, a sealed door once painted over, once forgotten. The next day, Jonah received another message. No greeting, no sign-off, just 7 words. You were right. They never searched for it. The deeper they looked, the more things didn't add up. Jonah and the journalist, working out of a rented storage unit turned research hub, began requesting physical records from Lenox Community College's facilities department. Their goal was simple: find any documented work orders from 2006, particularly ones involving the auditorium wing. The public database only went back to 2010, so they filed a formal request to view archived logs. What they received was a partial binder, photocopied poorly, with gaps in the ledger. Whole weeks were missing from the April to May window. The index jumped from work order 1,127 to 1,135. The rest were either lost or filed elsewhere. When asked about the discrepancy, campus officials said the records from that period had suffered significant water damage during a basement flood in 2008. They assured the team that digital summaries of essential work orders had been preserved. But when the journalist requested digital copies of those summaries, they were told the files had been migrated to a legacy server, now decommissioned. The explanation sounded convenient. Too convenient. They pressed harder, digging into hard copies at the county's public records office. There, they found something strange. A facilities audit from June 2006 noted 3 incomplete maintenance requests flagged for priority follow-up. 2 involved wiring inspections near the west hallway, and 1 involved minor drainage concerns in the break room behind the faculty lounge. All three were marked "in progress," with no documented completion. None of these jobs were listed in the files the school had provided. When they compared timelines, the three missing tickets all fell within 2 weeks of Nora's disappearance. There was no evidence they were ever addressed. The journalists started calling former employees. Most didn't answer. Some refused to speak on record. One former janitor who worked nights during 2006 said he remembered a broken fluorescent light fixture above the faculty hallway that kept shorting out. He claimed it flickered constantly in the days before Nora vanished. He filed a repair request himself. It was never fixed. He didn't know why. He also remembered something else, that after the disappearance, a facilities supervisor quietly instructed them not to enter the hallway during certain hours, due to asbestos concerns. No signage was ever posted. The hallway wasn't sealed off, but the order was clear. Avoid that wing. Keep it quiet. Attention turned to administrative turnover. The college's director at the time, Dr. Alan Creeley, resigned abruptly in the spring of 2007. His statement at the time cited medical and family obligations. No scandal, no accusations. But when the team reviewed board meeting minutes, they found that Creeley's resignation came just 2 days after a special session regarding infrastructure irregularities in the West Annex. Those minutes were redacted. The journalist filed a formal Freedom of Information request, but was told the redactions were protected due to personnel confidentiality. Still, it was enough to raise the alarm. In his final address to staff, Creeley reportedly said, "There are things I wish I had handled differently. Some things don't disappear just because we stop looking." That quote had never been made public. It came from a staff member who attended the meeting and never forgot the words. Then came the email. It was received at 2:16 a.m. from an encrypted address routed through 3 foreign servers. The subject line read only a 213. The body of the message was short, cold, specific. "You'll find what you need in room A213, but only when they're forced to clean it." No attachment, no name, no follow-up. Jonah read it 5 times before saying anything. It felt like a threat, or a confession, or both. They checked the return path. It dead-ended at a burner domain that had been registered and deleted within 3 hours. The line echoed in Jonah's head, but only when they're forced to clean it. The phrasing wasn't casual. It suggested someone knew what condition that room was in, knew it wasn't just sealed, but left alone deliberately. The college's insistence that no such room existed no longer held weight. They had blueprints, they had testimony, and now they had a message from someone who clearly knew what had been avoided all along, someone who had waited years to say anything, someone who might have been close, someone who might have been inside. The search wasn't about what happened to Nora anymore. It was about who had made sure no one could ever ask. In late February of 2025, a storm system stalled over Lennox County for nearly 36 hours. Flash floods overwhelmed drainage systems. Basements and lower levels across the region took on water. Lennox Community College was no exception. The West Wing, built in the 1970s, poorly sealed, rarely maintained, sustained the most damage. Custodial crews arrived the next morning to find standing water in the corridor behind the old drama department. Boxes from storage had shifted, some tipped over. Mold had bloomed across canvas backdrops and discarded props. The water had soaked into the baseboards, warping the wall along one section that had always seemed misaligned with the rest of the hallway. By the second day, the smell became unbearable. Pungent, sour, old. Not just flood damage, something deeper. While hauling out warped wood and rusted costume racks, a custodian leaned too hard against the section that had long been assumed to be a poorly repaired foundation wall. It gave. Not with a crash, but a soft, rotted collapse. Behind it was something no one expected to find, a narrow hallway, maybe 2 feet wide, running parallel to the wall itself. The drywall had been placed directly in front of it, as if to erase its existence entirely. The air inside the space was dense, heavy with mildew and something chemical, almost metallic. A dim bulb flickered at the far end, wired directly into a conduit that looked decades old. The hallway extended about 12 feet before ending at a metal door. The paint was chipped, no sign, no number, just a single vertical handle, coated in dust and corrosion. No one could remember ever seeing it from the other side. Campus security was called. Then the police. By the time officers arrived, the area had been cordoned off. The responding sergeant asked if the room was on the blueprints. No one knew. A facilities coordinator arrived but admitted he'd never been in that part of the building. When they attempted to open the door, it didn't budge. It wasn't locked. It was stuck, sealed by time or decay. They forced it open with a pry bar. The hinges screamed as the frame gave way. What they found inside stopped them cold. The room was small, just 10 feet across with low ceilings and no windows. It was filled with old theater props, a headless mannequin, bent folding chairs, a cracked mirror with tape across one corner. But the smell was the first thing that made officers hesitate. It was deep rot, the kind that clung to your throat. The second thing was the chair. Centered beneath a ceiling fixture hung by exposed wire was an office chair, rusted at the base. A thermos sat on the ground next to it, its label barely visible, the ink smudged but legible. It read, Miss Whitmore. Behind the chair, pressed into the far wall, was a narrow cot, frame collapsed inward. Next to it, a blanket hardened by time and mold. Officers backed out and requested a full forensic response. The room had not been entered in nearly 2 decades. Dust patterns confirmed that nothing had shifted in years. The walls were covered in water stains and mildew trails. But one thing stood out, a cassette recorder partially buried beneath collapsed prop boxes. When cleaned and tested, the tape inside played only static for 2 minutes, then went silent. But a spectrogram revealed faint background audio, unintelligible whispers, creaking, something rhythmic. The FBI was called to assist with digital analysis. Nothing definitive was recovered, but the tape's production date matched 2005. The thermos was confirmed as Nora Whitmore's. Her name is etched by hand. A forensic team found traces of hair, fiber, and blood beneath the cot slats. DNA matched Nora. It was clear the space had been repurposed, not as a traditional storage room, not as a panic space. It had been concealed, sealed off entirely. The question was why, and by whom. There were no identifying objects beyond what had already been cataloged. No fingerprints, no tools, no rope, no locks. But the nature of the room suggested one thing above all. It had been deliberately hidden. And not just to store props. The chair had been placed too deliberately. The thermos left too close to where a person would sit for hours. The room was soundproofed crudely, with theater foam and drywall layers. The forensic anthropologist assigned to the case later said privately, "It wasn't a room someone got stuck in. It was a room someone was put in. News broke within 24 hours." Breakthrough in Whitmore case, sealed room found on campus. Lorraine Whitmore was notified in person. She didn't speak to the press. The next morning, she drove to the west gate of the college, sat in her car for nearly an hour, then left without stepping out. The school released a statement calling the discovery shocking and under internal review. A task force was formed. But as details emerged, one thing became clear. Nora had never left campus. She had been there all along, just behind a wall no one had thought to check. The forensic team spent nearly 17 hours cataloging every inch of the hidden storage room. Despite the decay, the layout was relatively simple, an old prop storage repurposed into something far more confining. Centered in the space was a molded office chair, its vinyl peeling back in curled flakes. The legs were rusted, the wheels seized in place. On the concrete just to the right, a thermos lay on its side. Its paint had worn down to a metallic dullness, but stenciled across the body in hand-labeled marker, one name remained: Miss Whitmore. Next to it, covered in a layer of black dust and grime, was a cassette recorder. The tape inside had warped from years of damp exposure. It was removed carefully, sealed in a forensic envelope, and sent off for digital restoration. When played, it yielded only static. For over 2 minutes, no voices, no music, no identifiable markers, just the ambient distortion of magnetic tape degraded by time. But under analysis, a few faint elements emerged, a low sound repeating, possibly mechanical, a creak, a subtle shift, and then nothing. Tucked beneath the broken cot frame was what remained of a beige cardigan. Fabric analysis confirmed it had not moved since at least 2006. The threading matched photos of a sweater Nora was seen wearing the week she vanished. Trapped under it were deteriorated flats, one completely collapsed, the other split at the sole. Hair fibers consistent with Nora's DNA profile were collected from the headrest of the chair and the pillow near the cot. But the most troubling discovery came from beneath a rotted corner of the floorboard. Dried blood, traces soaked into the substructure, was located during the second sweep. The DNA was a match. Nora Whitmore. No one could say how much was lost to time, but it was enough to confirm that at some point she had been injured in that room. There was nobody there, no bones, no remains of any kind that could suggest where she might have gone. The concrete beneath the floor was intact. No crawl space, no concealed chute. The only access point was the door, the same one sealed shut until the flood forced it open nearly 2 decades later. Fingerprint testing on surfaces yielded little. Too much time, too much moisture, no matches, no usable samples. Even the cassette recorder had been handled so infrequently that the only prints found belonged to law enforcement who had touched it during recovery. The room had not been disturbed in years. That much was certain. It had been closed off, left to rot, buried under the natural forgetting of bureaucracy and time. The crime scene photos told their own story. The chair wasn't just placed casually, it was oriented toward the door, like someone had sat waiting. The cot was set against the far wall, just out of sight if the door had ever been opened. The thermos, when opened by lab technicians, still held a small amount of dried residue. Caffeine traces confirmed it had once contained tea. Chamomile. Nora's preferred drink, according to her mother. A detail so specific it anchored the rest of the evidence in something unmistakably human. This wasn't a room used for maintenance. It wasn't storage in any functional sense. It was meant to contain someone, not forever, but long enough. And yet, the final report left the cause of death undetermined. The lack of remains meant no autopsy, no clear mechanism, only blood, decayed belongings, and the implications of what such a room represented. Investigators debated scenarios. Had Nora entered voluntarily? Unlikely. There were no signs of struggle, but the cot and chair suggested prolonged presence. Could she have been lured or coerced? Possibly. But there were no records of faculty or staff ever entering that wing during her final hours. Could she have been mistakenly locked inside? Maybe. But that implied someone sealed the door afterward, someone who never came forward. Every answer depended on someone else's silence. Speculation quickly filled the void. Some believed she had been stalked. Others claimed a member of staff, now long gone, had lured her there. One theory argued she may have tried to hide, fearing something we'll never know, and had accidentally trapped herself. But nothing about the scene supported panic. The items weren't scattered. There were no marks on the inside of the door, no dents or scratches that might suggest desperate attempts to escape. It was a room that absorbed someone slowly, quietly, until nothing remained but her outline and forgotten objects. The discovery changed the case, but it didn't solve it. No charges, no suspects, no arrest. The statute of limitations didn't apply to murder, but without a body, without cause of death, without a clear timeline of how long she was alive in that room. It wasn't enough. For Lorraine Whitmore, it was proof of what she had always said. Her daughter didn't run away. She didn't vanish. She had been left behind, not in spirit, not in memory, but in bricks and mortar. On a campus that had sworn it searched every corner. A school that still couldn't explain how a room disappeared from its own records. In the weeks following the discovery of the sealed room and confirmation of Nora Whitmore's presence there, investigators began to re-examine personnel files from 2006, specifically those with consistent access to the West Wing. Names that had once seemed irrelevant were pulled back into focus. One in particular stood out. Professor Raymond Adler, a senior faculty member in the drama department, had maintained office space directly adjacent to what was once labeled Room A213. He had supervised technical theater students and oversaw backstage construction during his final year. In staff records, he was described as unconventional, theatrical, sharp-tempered. His teaching style was strict, bordering on aggressive. Former students remembered long lectures about isolation as a tool for emotional honesty. Actors need to live inside silence, he'd once told a class. You don't find truth in the studio spotlight. You find it in the still room where no one's watching. Raymond Adler retired unexpectedly in the summer of 2006, less than 3 months after Nora vanished. At the time, it raised no suspicion. He cited burnout, health concerns, and a desire to relocate closer to family. There were no disciplinary records, no formal complaints. His departure came quietly, noted only by a small farewell paragraph in the campus newsletter. He sold his home within weeks and moved out of state. No forwarding address was listed in HR files. By the time renewed attention was cast in his direction in 2025, it was already too late. Adler had died of natural causes 2 years prior. No spouse, no children. His estate had been closed and settled, but his property, stored in a rural Washington facility under his name, remained largely untouched. With the help of surviving relatives, investigators were granted access to the contents. Most of it was theater memorabilia, old programs, costume sketches, lighting plots. Several boxes were labeled Lennox 2004 to 2006. Inside were props from the school's final drama productions. One box contained an old-fashioned school desk, a set of foam bricks used to build stage facades, and a ring of labeled keys. Among them, one tag stood out. Written in faded black ink, the label read simply, "A 213." The tag was brittle, the ring corroded, but the key itself matched the backup locks used on all West Wing faculty doors. Investigators cross-referenced the serial number against archived locksmith records. The match was confirmed. But what the discovery meant was harder to interpret. The presence of the key proved access, but not intent. Adler had worked in that building for over 20 years. He'd been issued keys to multiple storage spaces. Many were never reclaimed after his departure. The college couldn't say definitively which locks had been changed or rekeyed after 2006. In interviews, former staff were split. Some described Adler as intense but brilliant. Others remembered outbursts, doors slammed during rehearsals, arguments over budget cuts, students pushed too far emotionally for the sake of a scene. One colleague recalled that Adler insisted certain backstage areas be off-limits during his rehearsals. He once scolded a janitor for sweeping too close to actor concentration spaces. No one asked what that meant. What troubled detectives more was what wasn't found. There were no journals, no letters, no recorded thoughts, no documentation about Nora. And perhaps most telling, no denial, no explanation, no apparent recognition that a sealed room in a building he oversaw had housed a missing teacher. If Adler had been responsible, he left behind no confession. If he'd known what was behind that wall, he never told anyone. Theories bloomed quickly. Some believed he had used the space as part of an experimental teaching method. Others speculated a darker explanation, that he and Nora had crossed paths in conflict, that a confrontation turned tragic. But nothing could be proven. There was no evidence they had ever spoken, no emails, no schedule overlap, nothing definitive. Just a key, a reputation, and a space built to be silent. The official report categorized him as a person of interest posthumously, but stopped short of naming him as a suspect. It was too thin. Without a statement, without hard proof, there was no case to build. His death closed the door before anyone could ask the questions that mattered most. The narrative remained stuck. Was Nora placed in that room deliberately, or did she enter thinking it was just another door she had the right to open? Did someone trap her, Or did she find herself trapped after it was too late? The ambiguity left everyone in limbo. Her mother refused to speculate. When asked by reporters, Lorraine Whitmore said only, "The truth was behind a wall for 19 years. I've waited too long to settle for guesses." She never mentioned Raymond Adler by name. She didn't need to. The room had an origin. The wall had a builder. And someone had once carried that key. Whether it was used to open the door or lock it remained the question no one could now answer. The official reclassification came on September 14th, 2025, 19 years and 5 months after Nora Whitmore walked into the West Wing of Lenox Community College and never walked out. Her case, long labeled active missing, was updated quietly in the national database to presumed deceased. No press conference, no arrest, no charges filed, just a brief email to her next of kin and a final report signed by the current sheriff. Based on forensic confirmation of biological evidence and the discovery of personal belongings in a sealed, inaccessible space, it was now believed, with reasonable certainty, that Nora had died on or around the day she disappeared, somewhere behind the walls of the place she taught. The room was resealed 3 days after the final search team completed their documentation. The decision wasn't made publicly. The college didn't issue a statement, but facilities workers were seen moving fresh drywall and tools into the West Wing after hours. By morning, the door was gone. The narrow hallway cleared. No plaques, no signage. Just a repainted surface that blended back into the corridor like it had never been disturbed. But those who had followed the story, those who had listened to the podcast, who had paused on every map and blueprint, knew exactly where it was. And they didn't forget. A week later, someone left a single white rose taped to the corner of the hallway where the false wall had once stood. Then another. And another. By the end of the month, there were nearly 24, some fresh, some wilted, some wrapped in college newspaper pages or notebook paper torn from class binders. No one took credit. No one needed to. Students walked past quietly. Faculty avoided the AEO wing. The administration remained silent. The room, once sealed by neglect, was now sealed by history, but not closure. The podcast's final episode aired soon after. Jonah Miles had delayed it, rewriting the ending more than a dozen times, unsure how to bring the story full circle when so much remained unsaid. In the end, he chose something simple. The episode opened with a replay of the warped tape found in the room, then slowly faded into narration. A calm voice, steady but raw. He recapped what had been found: the thermos, the sweater, the blood. The key discovered in Adler's belongings, the reclassified case. And then he said the words that would echo long after the audio ended. She was always here. Just behind the wall. In the months that followed, theories continued to surface. Online forums dissected every detail. A retired custodian from the early 2000s emailed anonymously, claiming he once saw Adler dragging heavy flats into that section late at night and refusing help. Another tip came from a woman who had worked part-time in the costume department. She remembered a conversation where Adler referred to certain spaces backstage as perfect rehearsal chambers, quiet, private, outside time, but none of it could be verified. No evidence linked him to a crime. No witness ever saw Nora enter that space. And without a confession or body, the prosecutor's office declined to pursue further investigation. Lorraine Whitmore never returned to campus after the confirmation. She issued a written statement through her attorney. "My daughter gave her time, her care, and her trust to a place that failed to protect her. That silence, for me, is louder than any apology." She requested no memorial, no dedication, no plaque. Instead, she asked that the hallway remain unmarked, so no one forgets that what happened wasn't acknowledged, only uncovered. For the students still walking those halls, the story became cautionary but never complete. Professors warned against late-night rehearsals. Rumors spread about flickering lights and unexplained cold spots. The room became a ghost without needing one. And every April 5th, someone, sometimes a stranger, sometimes a former student, left a candle burning on the sidewalk just outside the west entrance, the flame small, flickering, but insistent. There were no further suspects, no new names. The questions that mattered most never found answers. Who had sealed the room? Who held the key? Who looked the other way when she never came back? No one confessed, no one was held accountable. But for 19 years, someone knew, and for 19 years, they said nothing.